Welcome to episode 72 of the High Volume Hiring Podcast. I am Stephen Rothberg. I am the founder of College Recruiter job search site, where we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. And I am joined here today as usual, not always, but usual, by my fantastic co-host, Jeanette Leeds. Jeanette, great to see you today.
Great to see you as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette Leeds. I'm a HR tech entrepreneur, and we have a very special episode today. We are joined today by Brigadier General Amrhein, I got it right, who is the commander of the U.S. Air Force Recruiting Service, and he's located at the Randolph Air Force Base in Texas. General, welcome. We are so thrilled to have you here today.
Well, Jeanette and Stephen, thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion, and here we go.
Here we go. So why don't we level set for all of our listeners, just from in terms of stats and data, because I just love data and I'm a big data geek. So talk to us a bit about how many candidates a year are you engaging with? How many are applying and accepted? How does that just sort of give us a sense of that, and we can then dive into the real fun stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we love data too. We measure it. It's like baseball. There's a stat for everything. But I would offer. I'll kind of walk you through how we get somebody that is potentially or maybe didn't know they were interested, all the way through what you would probably consider the hiring process, or when we send them to basic training or to officer training school. Or to our service academy, the Air Force Academy, or to ROTC, which are detachments that are embedded within 4-year universities across the United States. But each year, we normally engage with approximately 3 million people that we would call leads. And what I mean by that is it's somebody that is interested, that was willing to, possibly give their name, or now what I will say is that we kind of have a filtering system on that, that refines those leads down. And sometimes people will be interested and they'll give their information, and, they may be 15 or 16 years old. And we're like, man, that is awesome that you are interested in service in the Air Force or the Space Force, whether that be in the active duty component or the Reg AF, as we call it, the Air National Guard or the Air Force Reserve. But we need you to wait a couple years and then come back to us. So not every lead is what we would consider a viable candidate. That lead then turns into what we would consider the appointment. So that very first contact where they're going to sit down with a recruiter, rather than say they're out in the field and they were maybe at an air show, or maybe heard somebody speak in the school that they were at, or saw one of our engagements out in the community. This is an actual appointment with a recruiter. And for this year, we had, on the regular Air Force alone, we had about 105,000, appointments. And then some people go, now that I think about it, but that then again, you start to refine that down, and that turns into 77,000 that were interested in starting the application process. And so as they go through the application process, what comes out on the other end is what we call the shipment, or those that we are entering into the Air Force or to the Space Force. And for this year, if I took the 3 million leads to the 105,000 appointments to the 77,000, entrants into the application process, we ended up shipping 27,200 regular Air Force, so active duty, into our enlisted ranks. And the leads piece is probably the same. But when you get to the officer, we do OTS recruiting, officer training school recruiting. And so we have probably over 2,000 applicants a year. So that, skip that step and go right into the applicant process, to put in about 500 what we call line of the Air Force, versus breakout specialties, which is, and then we brought in about 750 medical professionals. So that's kind of the spectrum, both for the officer and the enlisted side of our hiring process, our engagement, et cetera.
Wow, that's fantastic. First of all, kudos to you and to the Air Force for being so data driven. I'm not at all surprised. But on corporate America, that's an anomaly. For somebody, you know, in your position, yeah, or anybody else to just have those numbers and be so data driven, it then allows you to really look back and say, oh, we missed our numbers this year. Or, hey, we blew away our numbers this year. Why? What can we learn from that? How can we make better use of taxpayer money next year, the year following? So speaking of that, as you look back, what are some
Mhm.
things that have happened under your tenure where you would say, "Hey, we changed this and it was great." Like things that whether it's promotion, sponsorship, streamlining the application process, changing who's eligible. What are some things that you've done that it's like this really helped a lot?
Sure. So what I will say is there's probably about an 18-month span, and we operate on a fiscal year. So we just finished our 2024 fiscal year. We closed that out on the 30th of September. And this year we made goal. All components, regular Air Force, Air National Guard, and Air Force Reserve, as well as the Space Force, all made their goal. Last year we didn't. We missed by a little over 10%, and so we kind of saw that train coming a little bit before the actual closeout of last year, and corporately the Air Force responded with the things that you were talking about. And our current Chief of Staff, General Alvin, was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and he led an enterprise-wide team. We call it a cross-functional team. To see what barriers to service were out there. And so some of those things happened prior to the start of 1 October of last year. But we looked at some of those barriers, and some of them were what we would call outdated policies, or policies that we could simply just align with the existing Department of Defense rather than to have a different policy. And so we looked at several of those. There were about 4 or 5 of those policies that were either updated or just going, hey, this policy really isn't really appropriate, or it just doesn't apply anymore, or we changed it a little bit. So some of those that happened over the last summer timeframe were we adjusted our body mass index, and so. But we aligned it to the DoD standard. So everybody's like, oh, did you lower standards? Well, I would say we aligned it to the existing Department of Defense that the other services use. But when we get into the data that is really that matters, and we're talking about, again, maintaining all these things, we're still with hey, we have to maintain a quality force. And we brought in several thousand airmen that were now eligible because of aligning with the Department of Defense policy. Mm-hmm. And we had, of all of those 1,000, I think it was like 5,000 over the course of 18 months, we had 1 fitness failure out of BMT. And so the standard didn't change on the fitness program or anything else. We just adjusted that policy with the DoD policy. Another one we had is we launched a THC or a marijuana testing pilot, if you will. And so obviously when people come in and they go through the applicant processing, they are drug tested. And if they, if they were to show positive for only THC or, marijuana, depending on the quality of the applicant, we would allow them to retest in 90 days. And here is why I think that policy is understandably makes sense. Over 36 states in the United States have a variant of legalized marijuana. And so if you are someone that is unfamiliar with military service and may not realize that drug use is absolutely incompatible with military service, sometimes there is that, like you actually have to starting on the application process. Right. And that brought in several hundred. Again, quality. We do academic testing as well, and they have to meet very, very high standards. And then they have to test, negative before they actually get into that full application process. So, again, it was an adjustment. I think I would qualify that more as part of an education, because the number one issue for our recruiting and honestly joint recruiting. We all testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee last year what the number one challenge is, and it is a lack of familiarity with the military in America. And so that I would qualify as one of those barriers or policy adjustments that gets to address, that maybe they didn't know that. So that was another one. Another policy that was adjusted in January of just this year. So we used to have to require, if you were not a U.S. citizen, and you can list in our Air Force if you are not a U.S. citizen, but you are a legal permanent resident and hold that type of visa. The pre-existing rules on that was you had to have a 10-year visa from the age of 14 or beyond. And the logic on that understandably kind of made sense, because you can get someone probably through their entire first enlistment and their visa doesn't expire. But again, that was an internal policy. I aligned it with the DoD policy, and that is now a 2-year visa that is out there again to garner talent. And that was really done to also align with a policy that we put in place late last summer, which was accelerated naturalization. And so now, if you are interested in becoming a U.S. citizen, you can apply for accelerated naturalization while you're going through basic military training. When you complete successfully the basic military training process and your application and all the qualifications to be naturalized are complete, you will be naturalized as a U.S. citizen just shortly after graduation of BMT, which is about a 7-week process. So that's really fast. And what we found is that you now have the opportunity, if you have one of these 2-year visas, that you can also just mirror into the accelerated naturalization process. And so I know I've said a lot, and so let me pause there but those are some of the things from the policy side. I would like to shift to, we looked last summer, actually about early fall, on revamping our training and understanding where we had some manpower shortages and filling those, and then really getting what we call back to the basics and training. And that was also instrumental in us making goal right out the gate in 2024. Let me stop there. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Great.
I love that the naturalized citizen adjustment. I'm one. My neighbor immigrated, I think, 2 years ago, and he is in the process of enlisting. And that was a program that he spoke about. It was news to me. But Jen, I think we have time for one more question. Do you want to grab it?
One more question. This was great. I just want to say, I love, when you're thinking about it from a pipeline and recruiting standpoint, to make the numbers, just really looking to tie back to corporate America, looking at what are the policies, what are the screening requirements, what makes sense, and changing them. And I just think that's fantastic. So that was really awesome to hear. One thing we were talking about when we were in the green room was about how the Air Force and really just across the board, you involve everyone in part of the recruiting process, which is not always as common in corporate America. So maybe could you talk a little bit about how that happens and how that ties in when everyone is involved and not just a handful of people in recruiting?
Absolutely. And that was also last fall. We had a very, very big campaign called Tell Your Story, Tell Your Air Force Story, Tell Your Space Force Story. And so we really have done outreach to every airman and guardian at all ranks, regardless of their affiliation to active duty, guard, or reserve, to tell your story. Get out into the community. I tell everyone, not just the recruiters that work for me, you need to have a 2-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute, and 30-minute version of who you are, why you chose to join the world's greatest Air Force or Space Force, and what you do and what you like about it. Why do you stay? And so that's how we really have bolstered our entirety of our Air Force and Space Force, and challenged them and really said, hey, every airman and guardian, you are a recruiter. And again, if I go back to that lack of familiarity being the number one challenge, This is where you have the grassroots campaign where you don't have to go in and say, hey, I'm here for a recruiting visit. It may be, hey, I'm going to go speak at my kid's school this week and tell them. Or there's times that I'm in a grocery store and I may be in my uniform and I'll see somebody look at me and if, if they make eye contact, I'll say, hello, how you doing? And normally then they'll ask, I see you're in the military. And I go, yeah, I am. I'm in the Air Force. And this is what I've done. I flew airplanes for almost 20 years of my 28-year career. And I do recruiting now and then see if they want to have a conversation. And sometimes, recruiting is not about, hey, you should come into the Air Force, right? It's asking the question with people going, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your life? And let me give you some opportunities, understand who our community and culture is, because we are a family. And if you want to do something, I guarantee you, I'll say up to probably 99.9%, if there's a job in the civilian world, we have it in our Air Force and Space Force. And so now you have that opportunity to get a skill. There's a lot of benefits that come with it: education, continuing education, medical, but also you get this community and family. Even though we move every 3 or 4 years, you fall in on a new family and they're ready to receive you when it's happening. I think that's a little bit different than corporate America, but also I get to the purpose. And that's really, we do these jobs and they are skill sets, but they're really done so that we can make sure that our nation is safe and that our national interests are ensured.
Awesome. Well, General Amrhein, thank you so much for explaining that, walking through corporate America. Those of you who are listening, have a look at our friends in the military. What they're doing, the thoughtfulness is it's just beyond the pale. So thank you, Jeanette.
Yes,
fantastic.
Huge thank you. This was amazing, and thank you for your service. And this is just this is fantastic. So lots to learn. Hope everyone enjoyed, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, Jen.
And keep me out of a cockpit, because it will not end well.
On that note,
oh, it's really, really good. Hey, can I add just one thing? I think you said
Please.
It was keep me out of a cockpit, but one of those things beyond just telling your stories, we have incentives for folks to go out and we'll give them up to 2 weeks of, we call it permissive TDY. So it's like 2 weeks of time off. You don't get additional pay for it, but it's 2 weeks of free leave, if you will, to go back to your town and meet up with a recruiter and help them with events. So, again, these are incentives that are out there, especially if you're very young and you don't have a lot of leave built up, and it just resonates. And so those are the kind of things that we have out there where we utilize the entirety of our service to go tell our story.
Wow.
Awesome.
And then you're only going to have the most passionate ones who are going to say, that's me. I want to do that. That's fantastic.
Brilliant.
So,
all right. Well,
Steve and Jeanette, thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, General.
Huge.
Cheers.
Out here.